Welcome to today's webinar, How to Ensure a Seamless Marketo Migration. We're JTF Marketing, a global team of the world's leading Marketo Engage and marketing automation experts. We help organizations unlock the true value of Marketo Engage. We're pretty good at what we do, and that's why Adobe consider us the go-to experts to help their customers do more with Marketo Engage. From strategy, training and education to implementation and campaign management, we support admins and users to work smarter, not harder, making marketing automation less complicated, unlocking more value from their activity and their technology. We work with a range of organizations across a range of industries, and really we focus on key values which are empowering automation, doing more with Marketo Engage, and taking on those challenges that people have told you once upon a time aren't possible in Marketo Engage. So if you've ever been told that's not going to be possible in Marketo Engage, I want to hear from you. I want to know what your challenge is, and I would love to work with you on developing a solution. So let's get into it. I'm James Fletcher. I'm going to be the host of today's webinar. I'm a Marketo architect. I've got around 14 years of experience with Marketo Engage, implemented it more times than I care to imagine. But importantly, I'm here to share with you some hints and tips around migrations. How do we get them right? What are the gotchas? And importantly, what are the things that you need to be thinking about as you go through that process? So let's get started. Migrations happen for a range of reasons, and especially in the world of Marketo, where the architecture of the platform doesn't allow us to quickly just clone the entire environment, move to another one, and crack on. We have a bit of a challenge here where, if we start with that bottom point, if we swap CRM for any reason, then we actually need to go back and create a brand new instance of Marketo Engage, set it up from the beginning, and reconnect that new CRM. It's a really frustrating process. It's really convoluted for a lot of new systems that are in the market, but unfortunately, it's the technology we're working with. The second point is technology consolidation. So a lot of businesses who have historic business units using different technology stacks are starting to bring that technology together, starting to focus on how do we drive operational efficiencies and also reduce costs. We start to look at the consolidation of multiple platforms into one. Or, and probably the most common that we see in the market right now, is mergers and acquisitions. So if you have been acquired or you're acquiring other organizations, you will want to fold them into your tech stack in the most efficient way, the tech stack that you've strategically chosen and built and that can scale, right? So if you're implementing workspaces and partitions into Marketo, for example, you would want to make sure that that is set up correctly so that your merger or acquisition activity is complete. Or if you're selling off a part of your business, you also need to make sure that you are cleaning up or migrating certain elements out of Marketo Engage as well. Now, when it comes to understanding the scope of your migration, it's pretty broad, right? When we think about all the areas of Marketo, from reports, from smart lists, snippets, segmentation, preference centers, forms, images, tokens that we're using as personalization, the data that sits within Marketo, either being, Marketo only data or synchronized from CRM. Is it clean even? Is it working? What works, what doesn't? There's lots of questions that come out of the woodwork when we start thinking about the scope of your migration. Now, the key thing that I always look at when it comes to migrations is how do we get you within the current platform to the new one, carrying over only the necessary information that is required to keep the lights on. Within Marketo, sometimes it's quicker to rebuild stuff than it is try and migrate everything across. And so we developed this handy checklist that you can download from the resources section of our website, which really focuses on 10 key steps. Discovering the scope of your project. How do you go about that? How do you identify what needs to be migrated and what is extremely critical? Now, if you're working with JTF Marketing on this project, we will be devil's advocate and be questioning, are you really going to use that information? Will you really use that program again? That deactivated program from 12 months ago, why do you really want a copy of that? Do you need a downloaded copy of the asset so that you can go back and refer to it and say this was the results? Or do you genuinely need that asset rebuilt into Marketo. Now, one of the challenges when it comes to migrations, of course, is not all of the data can be carried across. And we'll come to that in a little bit. We're also looking at the timeline, right? So migration projects can be pretty complex depending on what you're looking to migrate, what you're carrying across, or what you are rebuilding. I often say take this opportunity to refresh and get rid of any tech debt that you might have within your platform, and importantly, then move that over as best practice into your new instance and allow you to scale from day one. Get rid of those historic challenges of we don't know what that program does, or this one doesn't work, or oh, we've got this workaround that we do this in this specific way. Get rid of it. Doesn't make any sense. So try and simplify, try and build scale from day one in your new instance. We have to remember this is a brand new implementation of Marketo. So there is a technical implementation step that we've got to consider, which is getting the SPF record set up, getting the domain set up, getting the permissions set up, getting the channels and tags correct. There's lots of things in that technical implementation process that we need to make sure works really well and is in place. We then start looking at global assets, so carrying across those global forms or program templates, email and landing page templates, the kind of glue that sticks everything together when we start building our programs. And then, only then, do we start looking at migrating the identified programs. So how do we take over the necessary programs to keep our business operational and move them from one platform to another? Now, again, there's a lot of complexity here because sometimes it's quicker to rebuild a program than it is try and use migration tools where we click a few buttons, something breaks, it's not linked to something else. And again, if we're fixing tech debt as we migrate, then the migration tools available from Adobe won't necessarily work. When we're looking at migrating data, we've got to be really cognizant of what data we're migrating. Is it going to come back in from CRM? Do we need manual loads to update data from Marketo only contacts and person records? And importantly, how do we bring that across? How do we scale that? How do we make sure that we're keeping the two platforms in sync? Because we'll be running two in parallel before we get to the migration. We've also got to carry across historic statuses as programs and activity. If we're working with engagement programs, this is specifically complex because we might want someone to be midway through a stream or receiving email 3, but they've already had 1 and 2, so we don't want to drop them at the back of the top of the funnel or the engagement program. So we've got to be really careful here in how we migrate stuff over, and we've also got to be really controlled in how we do so. When we get to go live, we've also got to consider that we're swapping forms out. We're also changing the IDs of those forms, which means we've got to update web pages, landing pages, etc., in order to make sure that we are redirected to the right place and that we're capturing data in the new platform. And then step 10, which isn't in the checklist, but I thought it was important to add in here, is education, right? So as things change in this new world of this best practice, maybe you're using workspaces and partitions for the very first time, then you will need to educate your users on the limitations and how to maximize that capability within the platform itself. Now, a lot of migrations are possible to automate. We use the APIs in order to do a lot of the automation ourselves, and that can be building a series of programs. It can be migrating assets and importing assets. Again, when we think about the number of images that we upload into Marketo, or we think about, how do we get the data from one place to another? How do we keep them in sync? It's really, really important. One thing we can also migrate is activity history. Now, this is always a topic. Every CMO wants all the activity history, every email send that's ever been sent to everyone who might not even be engaging, but they still want it, becomes a conversation. My comment to you here is don't carry absolutely everything across. Be really, really ruthless in what you want to carry across. It's a complex element of the project. It's additional cost, it's additional complexity, additional time. So be aware of that as you're thinking about carrying any activity history forward. Now, it's also important to remember some of the limitations when we're looking at a migration. First, but not least, is that this is a brand new instance. So it's not going to match like for like. We may have changes. We may have a rebranded template. We might have a better lead scoring model than we had before. It all depends on how we approach this migration project as a partnership. Again, if you're working with JTF Marketing, we will want to make sure that you're improving and getting to best practice standard as we go through that process. Of course, any reference lists, campaigns, reports may be disconnected as they move. And it might be, again, as we talk about workspaces and partitions. So maybe you're working in a dedicated workspace for your business unit now rather than a dedicated instance. So you may not be able to find certain things, or reporting might be slightly more complex than it was before. But remember, it can be rebuilt, it can be reconnected. It may just take a little bit of time to figure out what are those little joining of the dots. Of course, email and landing pages will all be set to draft when they're cloned across, and this is one of the steps in getting them approved and getting them active again for those active campaigns. This is why I focus a lot of my time when we work on migration projects, trying to confirm that we shouldn't be carrying across assets that we don't want to put live or that won't go live, because it's sometimes quicker to rebuild them. And it will also be cheaper from a migration project perspective. Let's be realistic about the opportunity cost here. Forms I've already touched on. We're going to be changing the ID of the forms because you're moving from one instance to another. The form ID contains a Munchkin ID, which is a tracking script, which also needs to be updated as well. And that's the last box there on the right-hand side, which talks around new users, getting a new cookie on every user, right? So the first email we send, we're going to be re-cookieing people, which might mean we are going to lose any activity from a group of people for a short period of time, and we won't have full visibility. I've also already mentioned the middle one, which is engagement programs. They're extremely complex for migrations if you're using a normal engagement program with email after email after email. If you're using embedded programs, of course, this is much easier to migrate, but much more complex in terms of updating those statuses and making sure that people get the right campaigns. Now, you can look at some of the migration options. We've put together a download here as well, so feel free to scan this QR code and have a look at this. These are some of the pros and cons of migration. So there are migration tools, there is instance copy. A lot of the times these don't work because we don't want to just clone bad implementations or tech debt. We've got to clean it down and build it again in best practice that allows us to scale. So really consider those options. Please come and talk to us if you want to kick around some ideas and in terms of what would work and what wouldn't work. It's really, really important that you get this migration right. It's really, really important that you don't fall into one of the common flaws of a migration project and think that it's just going to be easy, as Adobe say, we'll clone this instance and we'll just throw it over here in a new one and everything will be plug and play. It's not that easy. You're going to carry tech debt. Please don't do it. It's going to cost you more money in the longer term. Now, it's time for some questions. So we'll give you a few minutes just to put in some questions into the chat. And let's see what questions you've got for me today. Let's see what you guys have got. Let me just bring up the screen here. So one of the questions that come up here in the chat is, of course, timeline. How long does it take? This is how long's a piece of string, right? Because we've kind of got this element of how much or how many assets do you want to carry across into your new instance? Again, we recommend being really, really controlled on it. What we can do is give a rough estimate, right? So if we look at X number of programs multiplied by X number of minutes based on complexity, then we can work out how much time and importantly, how much money is it going to cost to migrate those programs. Some programs may be really easy to migrate, and that may save you some time as well. The next one is how can the activity log be exported and imported back into Marketo? That's a great question. So we have developed a solution which uses the APIs to extract the activity log, and then we import it back into the activity stream within Marketo Engage. It's a little bit complicated because there's a matching that we've got to do, because as we move person records from one instance to another, the ID changes, right? So it's not James Fletcher in instance production right now has ID 345, but actually in the new instance, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got to do that manual matching, make sure that we found the correct individual, and importantly, move them across. Next question here is, how can we handle duplicates as part of the migration process? This is really interesting actually, because as we migrate data, where it's Marketo only, and of course we're loading data in through the API, or if we're loading in through the UI, the user interface, then the UI will dedupe the records as we're loading them in. The API doesn't. And again, we've got to also consider, where are these duplicates from? Are they coming from CRM? If we've already connected CRM and we're now loading data in, how do we handle that? One of the things that I definitely recommend as we get into a new instance as well is look at data hygiene, right? So it's really, really important that we consider two things. One, that we run a deduplication against the database and make sure that we're merging all of our person records in Marketo or leads into leads and contacts. And we can do that in an automated way. We at JTF Marketing also have a tool that can automate that. It's a monthly service that runs in the background. And believe it or not, yes, you are creating duplicates on a monthly basis. So that number is getting bigger every month. We build it based on a set of rules. We clean the data down, make sure the data quality is good. But I also recommend looking at email validation and enrichment tools at the exact same time. It's really important we fill in any of the gaps. It's important that we future-proof what we're building, and that it's something that we can start to scale. Next question here is, how do we handle the field mapping? I'm assuming that's the fields between one instance of Marketo and the other. Depending on what connection you're creating, so maybe you are integrating to a CRM platform. If that CRM platform is then plugged into your new instance, we will pull down all the fields as we had in your historic instance. It's important, of course, to do an audit of any Marketo-only fields that might need to be carried across as well. So consider that. Make sure that if you've got Marketo-only fields and you're using them on a regular basis, of course, you carry them across. Again, program member fields, now heavily used within Marketo, is important to consider also. The next question here is about integrations and third-party tools. So this question is focused on specifically webinars, but let me broaden it out a little part. How do we migrate those launch points, those connectors, those integrations? Again, one of the things here is, how do we carry across the information that's relevant, right? So if we've got activity log information coming in, we might want to carry across attended webinars, etc. What you should be tracking anyway is the membership of programs. So, for example, in this current financial year, you might choose to update program statuses for the last 6 months, which gives you your full calendar view of successes and failures. And you might want to, again, integrate those into your CRM and build your reports in CRM, or maybe you want to build them in BI. Integrations are fairly easy, to be honest, because there's nothing complex to migrate. It's build the launch point connector, the API users, make sure that they're authenticated, make sure it's been tested and it's working, and you should be able to carry on as expected. The next question here is, what is the plan for testing and validating migrated campaigns? Again, brilliant question. We go through 2 steps when we're migrating. First one is we get a long list of all the programs that we need to migrate, all the related assets, and then we get our team to work on that and build those into the new instance. They then have a peer check, and that peer is checking the documentation we have. They're also checking the instance, the older instance, and saying, does this match? Is it correct? Have we missed anything? And then at that point, we then pass it over to you, the client, to say, can you check this? Can you approve it? Or do you want us to do a triple check and activate the program? So that's really important, of course, to make sure that everything is being checked before going live. The next question is forms. You mentioned that form IDs change. Will that stop data being collected? It will. Of course, when we cut across from one instance to another, we've got to make sure to time new data coming in through Marketo forms or campaigns using specific forms from one instance to another. Now, depending on the way that you build your website, you might have a code base that you're updating and you may be deploying that. You should be able to go through and do a find replace and quickly update. You may have to have your web team go through and update a plugin or a module, which might take a lot longer. The key thing here is to try and make sure that we are really clear on the forms that are getting any activity, right? So when we look at the forms and we're looking at identifying them for migration, we'll also make sure that we are identifying which of those forms are actually active. You may choose to disable some of the historic forms rather than update them in order to save you using multiple or migrating multiple forms. Of course, if you're using global forms, it shouldn't really matter because as we change the ID, we'll then be bringing the data into the new instance. One thing that's really important here is this cutover between campaigns. It's never the easiest process to migrate from one instance to another. I do recommend a small cutoff window of no activity, no campaigns. And also, we would look at any new data coming into the historic instance and where is it coming from and troubleshoot that way. Often when we're migrating, we have two instances of Marketo running at the same time, right? We are normally graced by a little bit of an overlap. We recommend minimum a month overlap when we do the cutover, because that will really allow us to focus on, are there anything that we've missed? Is there anything extra that needs to come across? Is there something that wasn't discovered in the discovery session that now needs to be thought of? The next question is, what metrics are used to ensure the success of a migration? This is often done just by asset volume, to be honest, in terms of we've moved it from one place to the other and it's active again, it's working, campaigns are going out the door. But again, the metrics might be, if we're improving best practice, you might want to see an improvement in email performance, for example. You might choose to make that an additional metric for understanding what has improved or what hasn't improved. And then this last question, I think we've already answered, but it's how do we identify the campaigns that need to be migrated? So there's kind of two ways we do this. One, we use the API to get a list of all the programs that are in the instance. We then filter it based on active programs, and then we manually review and say, do we need this one? Often what you'll find is in a lot of cases, you'll have campaigns that are very similar. They might not be program templates, so you may want to migrate one of them to use as a program template. Again, this is where the best practice piece comes in, because what we recommend is not migrating a one-off campaign, but actually building the program template ready to be used in the future. So definitely recommend really going through that detail of that migration list and understanding what needs to be carried across and what doesn't need to be carried across. We're out of time for questions, but of course, if you get anything else you'd like to talk to us about, feel free to get in touch with us at jtfmarketing.co, or you can drop us a line and we'll be more than happy to jump on a call and talk to you more about migrations and the things that you need to be aware of. Thanks for joining today's webinar, and I really wish you a happy day wherever you are.